All right, we are going to get started. Thank you so much for joining the Person-Centered Services Engagement Series session on supported decision-making and alternative to guardianship. So my name is Amy Albanese, and I'm the Community Relations Manager for our Eastern counties. And we always start with our mission, vision, and core values. And so Person-Centered Services provides health home care coordination for over 17,800 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in 18 counties, reaching throughout the Western New York, Finger Lakes, and Southern Tier regions. Our mission is to connect people to the care, support, and opportunities that maximize their quality of life. Our vision is a community where all people lead fulfilling lives, and our core values are people, integrity, and trust. So I'm just going to mention a couple upcoming events that we have. So our next engagement series session will be on multiple diagnoses. What does that mean? And so that will be on December 12th at 6 p.m. on Microsoft Teams. And we will send out a follow-up email following this presentation with these flyers. And you can also access them on our website under events. And then we also have in January on the 22nd and 23rd, our 4th annual Transition Services Expo. So this is an opportunity for families and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to meet virtually and interact with local providers who offer services and supports for successful transition. And so we're going to meet the presenter, which is Craig Menning. He's one of our member relations managers, and he's also a supported decision-making facilitator. So I'm going to let him take over and begin the presentation. And you can hold all your questions and put them in the chat at the end.
Hi, everyone. I'm Craig Menning, and as Amy said, I'm the Member Relations Manager with Person-Centered Services. I'm also a trained facilitator. We're going to be talking about some dry topic areas to begin with. It's important, though. I want you to know that I've gotten all this information directly from Supported Decision Making of New York. We're going to be talking about what supported decision-making is, supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship, supported decision-making as it relates to the law, and the supported decision-making of New York approach to supported decision-making. So what is supported decision-making? Supported decision-making is a now well-recognized practice by which people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are able to make their own decisions with the support of trusted persons in their lives and retain all their legal and civil rights. As supported decision-making of New York has shown, supported decision-making is useful and available for decision makers who are diverse as the population of New York. Supported decision-making can take different forms. It can be entirely informal, which is the case for the majority of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who live in the community and get decision-making support from families, friends, and service providers on an as-needed basis. Supported decision-making can be more formalized as when it is a result of a planned facilitation process, such as that used by supported decision-making of New York. The person with the intellectual and developmental disability is the decision maker, along with trusted people in their lives that have chosen, as supporters, reach an agreement, which is called the supported decision-making agreement, that describes the areas and domains in which the decision maker desires support, the kind of support they want from each supporter, and how they want to receive that support. Supported decision-making can be legalized when there is a law, as there now is in New York, that recognizes the process and affords legal recognition to supported decision-making agreements. Currently, 8 other states and the District of Columbia have passed such laws, and a number of other states are in the process of considering them. You can go to the next slide, Amy. Supported decision-making is an alternative to guardianship. Guardianship is the legal means by which a person's right to make their own decision is taken away and given to another, the guardian. Because it deprives the person of all their legal and civil rights, the Constitution requires that guardianship is the least restrictive means available and appropriate to protect the person. Often, the specific issues that cause parents to seek guardianship can be solved by other legal means like healthcare proxies, Social Security representative payee status, and/or special needs trusts, and now supported decision making. Supported decision making is increasingly recognized as a preferable and less restrictive means to guardianship by many groups, like, for example, the American Bar Association, the ARC of the United States, the National Council on Disability, the Uniform Law Commission, and even the National Guardianship Association. By providing a person with intellectual and developmental disability with supports from trusted people in their life, they are able to make their own decisions and retain all of their legal and civil rights. Supported decision making can play a necessary and important role both in the educational system and in providing critical resources for young adults who are transitioning out of that system. As a supported decision making of New York's pilot projects has demonstrated, children and young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities that receive services through the Department of Education until they are 21 under federal regulations called the Individuals with Disabilities Act benefit from this agreement. An important requirement of education under the Individual with Disabilities Education Act is transition planning, which generally occurs as students approach 18 to facilitate the child's movement to independent living and community participation. Unfortunately, all too often, transition planning focuses on the needs for parents to obtain guardianship over their young adult children, which is the antithesis of the IDEA's emphasis on self-determination. Consistent with both the purpose of the IDEA and the constitutional requirement of the least restrictive alternative, transition planning should be required to inform parents and students of alternatives to guardianship, especially the supported decision making. Equally important, supported decision restrictive alternative, transition planning should be required to inform parents and students of alternatives to guardianship, especially the supported decision making. Equally important, supported decision making and supported decision making agreements are important tools for transition age youth as they leave the educational system, as the supported decision making of New York pilot project has demonstrated. Also, supported decision making could and should be incorporated into the transition curriculum, ensuring that by the time they leave the Department of Education Services, students have a process in place through which they can make their own decisions with support they need, thus preserving their autonomy, dignity, and civil and legal rights as they embark on adulthood. Supported decision making is only a legal option for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Other vulnerable groups are not yet covered by supported decision making laws. You go to the next slide. Supported decision making and the law. Article 82 of the Mental Hygiene Law explicitly recognizes supported decision making, both informal and with a supported decision making agreement, as a less restrictive alternative that courts should consider before imposing guardianship. The law prevents discrimination against people with intellectual and developmental disabilities by requiring third parties to accept decisions made by persons with supported decision making agreements that have been entered into through a facilitation process set out in regulations drafted by the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. Those regulations have been drafted and are currently in a comment period. These draft regulations closely mirror supported decision making of New York's facilitation process. Agreements made prior to the finalization of the regulations, which means they were done within the pilot period, will be grandparented in. That is, the decisions made under those agreements, under the pilot, will be recognized by the law. The law incentivizes parents to consider and hopefully choose supported decision making as an alternative to guardianship. because supported decision-making is not some strange new thing, but rather a process the state legislature has overwhelmingly recognized. Additionally, it will ensure that a needed or desired service will not be denied in the future by a third party who could otherwise insist on guardianship. The law has a number of other important features. It describes who may be a supporter, the kinds of support they can give, and the limitations on the supporter's authority. It makes clear that supporters cannot make decisions for the decision maker, and that the supporters have no independent legal status. The law ensures that making a supported decision-making agreement is voluntary and not coerced by prohibiting service providers from conditioning services on the person making a supported decision-making agreement. Now, some things that the law does not do. The law does not affect a family's and others' ability to petition for guardianship if they choose. The law does not require anyone to do supported decision-making or making an agreement, including as a requirement for receiving services. The law does not prevent a decision maker from seeking support outside the provisions of their supported decision-making agreement, including from family members and others who may not be named as supporters, though only decisions made pursuant to the terms of the agreement will be legislatively, recognized. The law does not immediately legalize decisions made pursuant to the supported decision-making agreement. It does not extend legislative recognition to decisions made with supported decision-making agreements to groups other than those for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, such as older persons with cognitive decline, persons with psychosocial disabilities, or persons with traumatic brain injuries. But the creation of the law encourages government and civil society to develop appropriate supports so that they may be covered by regulations in the future. You can go to the next slide. The supported decision-making New York approach. Supported decision-making of New York has developed a three-phase facilitation model. You can advance to the next slide.
Are you not able to see the three-phase?
Yeah, you can. Yep, you can go to the next one.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So when a facilitator is trained through the supported decision-making of New York model, which is a very thoughtful model. This was a pilot that was done by City University of New York. It was based on many other countries and states who have developed such models. So the facilitator goes through a training that's several months long. And at the end of that training, the facilitator is assigned a mentor. The mentor follows the facilitator along and reviews notes and reviews processes as the facilitation takes place. The interesting thing I think can be appreciated by a lot of us who've been in the field for a long time is that training really teaches facilitators to get out of what is called goal think or goal speak. I think a lot of people can relate to that because under the OPWDD system, we're trained to help people create goals and help people achieve goals. That is not the role of the facilitator in this. The role of the facilitator in this is to shift from that goal setting and achieving mentality to one of listening, learning, and understanding the preferences and needs of the decision maker and the supporters. As I said, there continues to be monitoring of the process by an experienced mentor. Facilitators are assigned to decision makers by supported decision making of New York's staff. The assignments are based on attempts to match decision makers with facilitators based on common interests in possibly location, but although with the remote technology, that's not necessarily the case anymore, as most facilitations now are done through remote technology. Once a match is made, mentors facilitate a meet and greet between the decision maker, facilitator, and possible family members or others that already may support the decision maker. After the meet and greet, the facilitator works with the decision maker to schedule meetings. Meetings are done one-to-one between the decision maker and the facilitator. Go next slide, Amy. So in phase one, the facilitator works with the decision maker to learn about how they communicate, make decisions, the decisions that they are likely to arise in both the short and long term, and the trusted persons in the decision maker's life whom they may want to choose as supporters. The facilitator guides the decision maker through the steps of making decisions in order to identify the kinds of support the decision maker may want and need, and to build decision-making capability and intrinsic motivation. This phase is where the development of the Big Four chart is started and will lead to the framework for the supported decision-making agreement. Facilitations can be a very lengthy process. It is meant to be slow and thoughtful. Meetings are scheduled at the frequency and duration that meet the needs of the decision maker. You can go to the next slide. So this is the Big Four chart. This is one page of the Big Four chart. As you can see on the left side of the chart, it talks about which areas the decision maker may want support in. While this is a set chart, you can also add topic areas to this left side. The second column describes what types of support a person wants. So you see help gather information, help understand information, and I won't read all the way through these, but the supporter will identify, or the decision maker will determine the types of support that they want in each of these areas, and that can vary from area to area. The next column says who do you want to support you? That can also vary. A facilitation I did recently, the mother of the decision maker was a large support in the decision maker's life. But for example, this decision maker had an uncle who was in the finance field. So he identified his uncle as a supporter who he wanted to help him with decisions on money. And lastly, how do you want to receive that support? And that is really what does that mean to you? Do you want to sit down at the table and discuss these things? Do we want to do it by phone? So it's very specific as to what the preference is, how the person wants to receive the information. You can go to the next slide, Amy. So phase two, in phase two, the facilitator works with the supporters the decision maker has chosen, educating them about support decision making and helping them to reposition from people who make decisions for the decision maker to those who are able to see the decision maker as an adult capable of making their own decisions and to support them in doing so. In exploring the dignity of risk, the facilitator fosters capacity building for supporters to maintain their commitment to the decision maker's autonomy and growth long after the facilitation process is completed. Dignity of risk is an important, sometimes difficult topic for supporters, and I would say especially family members, especially parents. We are often very protective of our children, and particularly our children with disabilities. As supporters, we must remember the value of personal empowerment that comes with making our own decisions, and that some of our greatest and most impactful lessons were learned from facing the consequences of our decisions. You go next slide, Amy. During phase three, the facilitator works with the decision maker and their supporters to review the Big Four chart and negotiate the supported decision-making agreement. The supported decision-making agreement will reflect and memorialize the parties' agreement on all aspects of the Big Four. The facilitator then prepares a draft of the supported decision-making agreement, and all parties review and may choose to alter the agreement. Then it is submitted The draft is submitted to the mentor. Once reviewed by the mentor, the agreement is sent to the supported decision-making of New York's legal team for final review. Phase 3 is also the time to ensure that before signing the supported decision-making agreement, all parties fully understand their roles, obligations, and responsibilities. Next slide. The facilitators send the draft of this supported decision-making agreement to all parties. Then the parties all have a chance to review it in preparation for the signing ceremony. The facilitator then works with the decision maker and the supporters to schedule the signing ceremony. The signing ceremony for most decision makers and their family is a time to celebrate. A lot of work gets put in at this point, and it's a time to celebrate the growth of the decision maker. It's also a time to affirm the process they have collectively put into place, a process that is intended to serve the decision maker throughout their life. It is important to know that once the supported decision-making agreement is signed, it can be changed at any time by the decision maker, and supporters can drop out at any time. There is a process for doing that. I won't get into that here, but it is important to know that this is something that can be changed. Getting started. Go to the next page. So this is the right on the supported decision making of New York's website. You will see that there are some barcode scans there, which can help you get registered for information session. This is not one of them, unfortunately, but you will have to attend an information session, and then you will attend a sign-up session. Again, this can be found on supported decision making of New York's website, which is sdmny.org. You can go to the following slide there, Amy. That's the website. So I really encourage people to go to this site. It has a lot of really great information. It has some videos about supporters and decision makers who have gone through the process, and many other resources. Okay, so through my work as a facilitator, I've met with care coordinators. I'm happy to see several of them on today, so thank you for that. I met with families and people receiving services. Here are some of the questions that I face pretty regularly, so I'm going to go through these as I believe you may have those same questions. First of all, is there a cost to me for facilitation? Excuse me. The answer to that is no. There's no cost for facilitation. That doesn't mean that there isn't a fee for it, but it currently is covered under the pilot project. The pilot is coming to an end. I was just at a conference recently where it was being discussed how facilitation is going to be funded moving forward. That could be through the waiver somehow, could be through self-direction. There are a lot of options on the table. That has not been decided upon yet, but it's under discussion, and they're committed to not having an out-of-pocket cost for families or people receiving services. Can paid staff be supporters? The answer to this is yes. Paid staff can be supporters. Of course, that does bring up some conflict of interest issues, as you can imagine. But that's really up to the individual agencies to figure that out. Those of us, again, who have been in the field a long time, understand that some of the people we support have only staff as supporters. That's unfortunate, but it's a reality. So to deprive them of that resource would be very unfortunate and not productive. What is informal supported decision making? That's interesting. So as the law recognizes informal supported decision making, it really doesn't clearly say how informal supported decision making is supported by the law. What informal supported decision making is essentially is what we kind of all do. We all make decisions and typically have people that we bounce things off, run things by, to help us make our decision. So that is really what informal support decision making is. I will, if you're interested in learning more about that, I will try to get more information on exactly what that looks like, as it relates to the law and the legal protections offered by that. Are supporters legally responsible for decisions made by a decision maker under the agreement? The answer to that is no. Supporters are not supposed to be making decisions for the decision maker, and they're not accountable to those decisions. As you know, I always use the example of somebody entering into a lease. The decision maker would be accountable to a lease that they enter into, even if they did it against the will of the supporter. Okay. Now, that being said, decision makers still have the protections offered to everybody under the law. So they are protected from abuse and exploitation, just like anybody else. So a lot of people that approach me about facilitation think that the facilitator is here to sit down with an identified decision that the decision maker is struggling with and help them work through a decision. That's not the case. What the facilitation process does, what the facilitator does, is work with the decision maker and the supporters to create the framework by which decisions are made. And that becomes the supported decision-making agreement. So, as I said before, we're not in this goal setting and achieving mentality. I want to get an apartment. Okay, here are the steps you need to go through to get an apartment. That's not what this is about. It's about having that framework, knowing that the decision maker has those supports, that the decision maker understands that, and that they look toward the agreement to make those decisions. So, as I said earlier, Craig Menig, Member Relations Manager. If you have any further questions, please take down my number or my email address. I'm happy to talk about this topic one-to-one or in groups. If you are a member of a parent group or a recreation group or a self-advocacy group, I'd be happy to come talk to you about this topic or other topics, such as care coordination, life planning process, and other topics. So if you want that sort of meeting with me, please reach out. That includes the care coordinators that are here. I've met with several care coordinators. I work with several families. It's really good to have that back and forth interaction. So I'm always willing to do that, and we really look forward to doing that with you.
All right, thank you so much, Craig. So this webinar was recorded and it will be available on our website. So this is the QR code to our website where we house all of our webinars that we've done and the recordings. And so we continue to add those each time. I just did a webinar yesterday, that will be up there. So as we do webinars, they are recorded and put on our website. And if you do have your phone on you and you wouldn't mind taking out the camera and using this QR code to provide us some feedback, we're always looking to improve. And there's also a section on there where you can give us some suggestions for future engagement session topics. So we'd greatly appreciate that. And we will send you a follow-up email probably early next week, and I'll attach the flyers for our upcoming sessions that we have. And I'll include this link as well. But now would also be a great time to open up a live Q&A. So if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and we'll get you some answers. And then I'll go back to Craig's slide shortly so you can get his contact information if you did not. If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. there any other questions, Craig, that typically come up that maybe weren't included in the slides?
Oh, I can't think of any, Amy, right off the top of my head. I did see one question come in.
I'm not sure if your question's referring to enrolling in supported decision-making or in getting care coordination services. So if you're able to elaborate on that.
And if it is indeed enrolling in care coordination services, we have just posted an orientation video on our website under the member relations tab. That's a very good orientation to let you know what to expect when you first enroll with care coordination. I would
I'll put my email in the chat, so feel free to email me and we can schedule a call and I can help connect you to our intake department.
Oh, to enroll. I'm sorry. I didn't see. I misunderstood. Yep.
Yeah, I think that.
Yep.
Right, my email's in the chat. Any other questions? So we got a hand raised. I did just allow you to use your microphone, I believe.
Hi, yeah, I don't know if anybody else is experiencing this, but my chat says chat is only available during the meeting. So maybe that's why you're not getting any questions. I'm not able to type anything in the chat. I don't know why.
Are you able to utilize the Q&A section?
Let me see.
It might be in the settings too, but it looks like somebody did put in the Q&A. So if you're unable to use the chat box, please put your questions in the Q&A section. Or you can raise your hand and I can give you the ability to unmute and speak as well. But thank you for letting us know.
Okay, thank you. I was in the wrong spot.
All right, Catherine, are you able to use your microphone?
Yes, I can. Just a quick question. So, the supported decision making, is it kind of like a proxy, or is it more like a more scripted, written out, detailed contract?
I would say it's more like a contract, keeping in mind that although the agreement is in place, the decision maker doesn't have to follow that agreement all the time, right? So in other words, if the decision comes up and they make a decision, what the agreement does is essentially when a third party is aware that that agreement exists and the decision is made under the agreement, they are required to accept the decision of the decision maker. Does that answer your question? It's not so the supporter does not make decisions for the decision maker.
Okay, so basically, like, I'm just thinking, like, when it comes to health, or it's basically a contract that you would give to healthcare officials,
That,
schools, saying this person can make the decisions along with their supporters, and you can't go against it, basically.
that's right. That's right.
You can't
And-
coerce them or
right.
anything like that. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. So, yes. Now that being said, you and I both know that people will be skeptical, perhaps in some instances, of a person making a decision under this agreement. and it may cause a delay in them ultimately accepting the agreement. But it does have the force of law behind it. There is some information written within the regulation and the law that that does speak to capacity. However, if there's a well-written agreement, the capacity really shouldn't be an issue because that should be identified within the agreement and the level of support offered under the agreement. Does that make sense?
Yes, because that was my other question, was mental capacity, and like, could the other person who, like either medical or health say, well, you're not mentally capable, and then, like override it.
They can't override. They can try to override. They can try to override. I mean, again, you can't stop people from questioning it, right, or
Correct.
delaying the decision, but it does have legal backing. So, the regulation set forth by OPWD has some good language in it, and I don't have it in front of me, and it's not released completely yet. Like I said earlier, it's under a comment period. So, there is some good information in that, however, and in Article 82, which is also available on the SDMNY website. And it's not long. The Article 82 is not a long document. Um, this section is not long. So I would encourage you to look at that.
Thank
We
you.
had another hand raised. I just unmuted your microphone.
It was remuted, Amy.
Not sure how. It says
Which person was it? Because
Elida Green.
let me
Hello.
see.
Oh,
yeah.
hi.
There you go.
Right. Okay, so I was taking notes, so I may have missed this. When should our families be beginning this process? Is it 18? I wasn't sure when they should be looking at this process or starting this.
You should be looking at it when you start transition planning. So as early as 15, right?
Okay,
Now,
that's what I thought at first, but I didn't want to be wrong.
yeah, and so the agreement can't be signed until the person's 18. It's a legal document, right?
That's what I thought.
You're right. So the person a person I facilitated with recently, we worked through the facilitation process when he was 17, and shortly after his 18th birthday, he signed the agreement. But it's good to introduce early, and I think really, going even if it's as much as working through the Big Four chart, helping people understand how they make decisions. That doesn't have to be an immediate formal process, but it's good to have people start thinking that way, right? And especially for parents and people that are potentially supporters, it's really my experience with facilitation is when I meet with a parent, and one of the first things I say is I'm going to be meeting with the decision maker alone. That's pretty alarming to some people immediately, right? So parents have that. I'm not saying everybody, but it's a very natural type of protection, right? But it's good to. I would argue, in preparation for ultimately going through the facilitation process, it would be good to talk with your child about it and how they make decision, what it looks like. So they'll be more likely to engage, and it'll be perhaps more productive for them.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
we had a question in the Q&A. And can someone approaching 18 years old work on this ahead of their adulthood? So this has been talked through as a process rather than a one-time event, which it sounds like you may have just answered some of that.
Yeah. So I think it's a great idea. As I said, the person I most recently facilitated with was 17 when we went through the process. This is not meant to really be a one and done, but part of the nice thing about the support decision making agreement is there to reflect upon. You can pull it out when you can talk about the setup, and it can change as people mature. They may want to change that agreement. And supporters may not want or be able to always provide support the way it is listed under the agreement also. So, supporters can also change that.
Then we had a question in the chat box and then another two hands raised. So the question was, so if you have an adult child who does not believe they need help and want to do things on their own, but are being taken advantage of and unable to make informed decisions, this would not be beneficial, question mark?
It's not going to be beneficial if they're not entering into the process willingly. That sounds like what you're saying. Am I right in that? If they're not going to engage in the process, it would not be beneficial, I guess, in short.
Yep. And then does supported decision making and facilitation expire after 21?
No.
Okay.
No, it's anybody, any adult can enter into a supported decision making agreement at any age. And technically any level of disability, technically speaking. As I said, if somebody has a very significant intellectual disability, and the process is very thoughtful, and it can address those needs, and it can be effective for almost anybody.
Then Amy Lapata, I just unmuted your mic. You had a question?
Hi, Amy.
Hi.
I kept hearing Craig saying, Amy, next slide. And I'm like, oh, that's not me.
Nope.
So
just me.
I'm appreciating all this conversation because I had not been thinking of it as, because I also oversee at the ARC the family support. So having parents aware of doing this with their younger kids, but I'm coming from the other side of things where we have people that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. We just evaluated someone recently who's, in her 70s and doesn't have a legal guardian, hasn't appointed a healthcare proxy, but she seems to have some good, like we've had our psychologist involved in doing assessments of someone's abilities, right? And so our psychologist has been saying, she's actually the one who told me about this webinar, here's a person who I don't feel needs full, supportive guardianship. It would be a good idea to consider supported decision making. So is that are you finding you're facilitating these kinds of things for older adults who just don't have those other resources or had never realized it was an option?
I haven't encountered that yet, and I
Okay.
can't speak to supported decision making in New York's experience with that. However, I can see that as a very viable option for many people who would live in residential settings. Many people.
I love that you answered the question whether paid staff could be supporters, because we have the limitations of we can't be someone's healthcare proxy.
Right.
But you're right. We sort of informally do it right now, but it would be better if they had a legal document that helped them name the people they would like to support them.
And your organization, I believe, and I'm not suggesting that I know what your organization should do, but they're likely going to have to address in some way in their policies how the person is going to be protected from the conflict of interest, right?
Yeah.
So it's just something, as you have that discussion with your organization, just keep that in mind. And by the way, if you'd like me to come to speak with any parent groups or staff or anybody, please.
Yeah,
please let me know.
I just met with Self Advocates today, and I know they have guest speakers come in all the time for their group, so that would also be a great.
I'd love to do that. Yeah, that's
thank you. So
self-advocacy groups are really a target group of mine, so I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And Amanda, I just unmuted your mic. I think you still have to unmute it, Amanda.
My apologies.
That's all right.
How would this work for people who are nonverbal? Or could it work for people that are nonverbal?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It would just be a matter of determining how the facilitator is going to understand the person, right? So, yeah, absolutely, that would be a possibility.
Okay. Maybe Craig, I'll email you separately because I have a specific case in mind. So.
Well, why don't you just throw a meeting on our calendars and we'll talk it through.
Okay, sounds good.
And we had another question in the Q&A. If I am understanding this, the decision maker has the ability to express what they want and do not want.
Yes. I think I'm understanding the question. Is that within the context of the supported decision-making agreement?
I believe so.
Okay, yes, yes. So yeah, I mean, the decision maker drives this process, right? Now, if you get to the point where you're negotiating the supported decision-making agreement, a supporter may say, no, I can't, I can't buy into that. I'm not on board with that decision or with the way I'm supporting you in this process, right? And can exclude themselves, right? So obviously, a decision maker can't make a supporter be a supporter. They can't make the supporter. Yeah, I mean, it really has to be, everybody involved has to be willing participants and understand the process. Did I answer that question?
Hopefully.
Okay, let me
I
know
know
in the
he's
chat
got
if I
another
did not.
hand raised. So we have another question. If the child has supported decision making, should the parent still have healthcare proxy for the child?
So we're
Is
talking
there a
about an
fine-
adult, yeah, an adult child. So I actually, that came up at the conference I was at, and it seemed to be the consensus that that would be a good idea. And I
Is
think
there
there
a
are other,
fine? Oh, sorry. There's more questions to it.
yeah, I think yeah, and I could just, so I act as health care proxy for somebody. And the only reason I would say that it would be important is because there are circumstances that could arise where the person couldn't make a decision even under the agreement for themselves, right? So I think having the healthcare proxy is a good idea, even if, and it can still be listed within the agreement, but it can be identified as we're going to follow the healthcare proxy under these circumstances, right?
The other part of the question was, is there a financial proxy that can be used, or does supported decision making cover the supporters as decision makers if the person can no longer act on their own?
No, so if the person can't act on their own and make their own decision, they're not going to be covered by the supported decision-making agreement. Yeah, so if for some reason they are in a circumstance where they no longer have the capacity to make the decision under the agreement, like a supporter can't just step in and start making decisions for them. No, that's not the intent of the agreement.
And then Julie has a question. I just unmuted your mic.
Amanda's question answered my question.
Okay.
About nonverbal. I have a family that I have in mind, so I will reach out to you, Craig, to bounce some ideas.
I can tell you that it's going to take some education on my part to work with somebody who communicates other than verbally. It's been a long time since I've been in that position, but of course we want to do that.
Okay, thank you.
And then we had a question. Ultimately, it sounds like people need to understand that the supporters do not make the decisions. It's not a proxy where you can step in when they cannot.
That's exactly right.
Mm.
There has to be an independent documentation of that, and there are other ways to do that other than immediately taking away somebody's rights under guardianship. And I don't mean to be critical of guardianship. I think, unfortunately, guardianship has traditionally, historically, been the go-to when someone's graduating from high school when they have an intellectual or developmental disability. It's been the go-to, and it's really unfortunate because in my position, I think Amanda's still unmuted.
I got it.
Okay, putting her dog out. Sorry, let me get back to that thought. I lost it for a second there. So ideally, what's going to happen, and this is very new to New York State, remember, ideally what will happen is care coordinators become aware of this. So in families, people receiving services, lawyers, judges. So when the topic of guardianship comes up, you're immediately going to think of, was supported decision-making explored for this person? And if not, before we proceed with guardianship, we need to look to see whether supported decision-making is a viable option for this person because it is less restrictive and that's required by law, right?
And Craig, can you kind of just speak to how the process of being assigned a facilitator works? Because there may be some questions on here. People might just assume that when they submit their application, they might be able to work directly with you. But I think there's like a pool of facilitators and a process and how that works.
Yeah, so there are this I know is going to be shocking for you to believe, but there are far too many facilitators. And Supported Decision Making of New York is currently conducting another facilitation class, so they are building capacity. But there are a lot of people who want to go through this process. So I don't believe they call it a wait list. It is in effect a wait list. So when you go through the session, when you get on you express your interest, you will be eventually assigned a facilitator, but it could take quite a long time. Hopefully the time will decrease as facilitators are as they build facilitation capacity. But as I said, so how it's done is essentially you're looking at the person. There's a group of people at SDMNY that look at the people who want facilitation, the decision makers, and say, with their knowledge of the facilitators, interest, and so on, try to do the matches the best they can. I was very fortunate so far. So I think that'll continue. I'm waiting on my next meet and greet actually right now. So
Can people request to work directly with you, or is it just a pairing through
yeah,
the
no, I
state
don't.
system?
Yeah, they can't right now, just because of the number. That being said, I don't know. Right now I'm only doing one at a time because I have another full-time job. But there I could see a point where I could do two at a time, perhaps. And I believe other facilitators may be able to do that too. I don't know if that's going to be an option offered by Supported Decision Making of New York.
The next question is, are only supported decision-making agreements made through SDMNY recognized by New York State?
Yes. Yes, because the it's written within the law that only people who go through this process as set out by SDMNY right now. I mean, nobody else is doing it. They're the only ones doing it. They're the only ones doing the training. So will that change? Yeah, it'll likely change, but it's still going to be the same training that was created by SDMNY in CUNY. So
I don't see any other questions, so still have about 5 minutes left. If anyone has a couple more questions, you can raise your hand, put it in the Q&A box or the chat box, or feel free to reach out to Craig one-on-one.
yes, thank you. Thank you everybody for attending. This is a really great turnout and I appreciate it.
If we don't have any other questions, thank you again for taking time out of your night to join us. And we do have some upcoming webinars that I mentioned in the beginning, so we'll send those out in a follow-up email. And I highly recommend to follow our social media and subscribe to our newsletter, as we're always sharing success stories, great news, different events, lots of great things going on in the community. But thank you again, everyone, for joining. And if we'll stay on for a few minutes if anyone has last minute questions. Amanda, the sessions do get posted on the Person-Centered Services Facebook page. So all of our events should be promoted on our Instagram, our LinkedIn, our Facebook, all of those. And then we also do on our website on personcenteredservices.com, we do have a event section where all of the events that we're hosting and where we're going to be in the community are listed as well. All right, well, we are going to sign off. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of your evening.